Do cheating husbands, lies, and shocking betrayals fascinate you? Then this is your channel. Drop a like and subscribe. You won't want to miss what's coming next. People in Santa Barbara used to stop me at the farmer's market just to say how lucky I was. Megan, you two are such a beautiful couple. I smiled every time. I believed it too. My name is Megan Harlow. I was 34 years old, married to Nathan Harlow for 9 years, living in a house with ocean views and a garden I tended myself. Nathan was in real estate development, the kind of man who knew how to walk into a room and make everyone feel like they already trusted him. Charming, polished, deliberate. We went to charity events. We posted anniversary photos. We looked like a life worth envying. But there's something nobody tells you about beautiful surfaces. They require constant maintenance. And somewhere along the way, I stopped noticing how much energy I was spending keeping ours intact. It started with numbers. Nathan had asked me to help organize documents for an internal audit. He trusted me with that, he said. I was detail-oriented. I had a background in accounting before I left my career to support his. So I sat at the dining room table for 3 evenings with spreadsheets and contracts spread around me, and I started to see things that didn't add up. Inflated vendor contracts, payments routed through shell companies, and then a life insurance policy, recently updated, $5 million. My name as the beneficiary had been quietly replaced with his, as the sole administrator of the payout in case of my accidental death. I remember sitting very still for a long time. I told myself there was an explanation. There had to be. This was Nathan. This was my husband. When I brought it to him that night, he didn't get angry. That's what unsettled me most. He got cold. He told me I was misreading things, that I didn't understand the structure of his business, that I should trust him. He said it gently, almost patiently, but his eyes said something else entirely. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay next to him in the dark, listening to him breathe steadily, and I felt something I had never felt in 9 years of marriage. I felt afraid of my own husband, and I should have listened to that feeling much sooner. I've replayed that night thousands of times in my head. Even now, certain details come back sharper than others. The sound of rain against the windshield, the way the road curved just before the bridge, the sick feeling in my stomach that told me something was wrong before I could name it. 3 days after I found those documents, I made a decision. I was going to contact an attorney. Not to destroy Nathan. I want to be honest about that. Part of me still loved him. Part of me wanted to be wrong. But I needed someone outside our life to tell me what I was looking at. I didn't tell him my plan. Something instinctive told me not to. That evening, I left the house under the pretense of visiting a friend. It was storming, the kind of coastal storm that turned Santa Barbara's roads into rivers. I drove carefully, hands tight on the wheel, mind racing. I noticed his headlights about a mile from the bridge. I recognized the car. I told myself it was coincidence. Maybe he was going to the office. Maybe he'd seen me leave and wanted to talk. But he didn't pass me. He stayed close. Too close. When I reached the bridge, I slowed down. The rain was relentless. I pulled slightly to the shoulder, thinking I'd let him pass. He didn't pass. He stopped behind me, got out. I lowered my window. He was standing in the rain, and his expression, I'll never forget it. Not rage, not desperation. Something calculated and distant, like he had already made a decision and was simply carrying it out. He said, "Megan, we need to talk. Get out of the car." I said no. I said I was going to drive away, and we would talk in the morning with an attorney present. I turned forward, reached for the gear shift, and then the impact came. Not a collision from another vehicle, a deliberate, forceful push from behind, his car against mine, precise and hard, sending me through the guardrail. The fall lasted less than 3 seconds. The water was black and freezing, and then, nothing. I didn't wake up knowing who I was. I woke up to fluorescent lights, a thin blanket, and a woman in scrubs asking me if I knew what month it was. I didn't. I didn't know my name. I didn't know the city. I didn't know anything, except that my head felt like it had been split open and reassembled incorrectly. The doctors called it severe traumatic brain injury with associated dissociative amnesia. In plain terms, my past was gone. Not completely. I still knew how to speak, how to read, how to function, but the personal architecture of my life had collapsed. No faces, no names, no memories I could claim as my own. I had been pulled from the water by two fishermen working the coast south of Santa Barbara. I was unconscious, hypothermic, and had no identification. No phone, no jewelry, not even a wedding ring. The hospital registered me as a Jane Doe. Weeks passed. No one came looking for me, or so I was told. What I didn't know then, what I would only understand much later, was that my husband had already held a memorial, had already told the world I was gone, had already begun the process of becoming a grieving widower. No one was looking because the man who should have been searching had already decided I was dead. I was transferred to a rehabilitation center in Fresno. The staff there gave me a name to use while my identity remained unknown. Anna. Simple, neutral, a placeholder for a person they couldn't yet identify. Anna worked better than I expected. I held onto it like a handhold on a cliff. I got a small job at a bookstore near the center. I organized shelves, learned the inventory, made quiet conversation with customers. I was functional, careful, polite. But at night, I dreamed in fragments. A voice in the rain, a ring being pulled from my finger, hands, impact, cold water rushing in. I never told anyone about the dreams. I wasn't ready to know what they meant. 3 years is a long time to live as someone else. By the time it happened, I had almost made peace with not knowing. Almost. There was always a hollow place in my chest that no routine could fill, a sense that somewhere, a version of me existed that I couldn't reach. I was sitting in a cafe on a Tuesday afternoon, a cup of coffee going cold in front of me, when the television above the counter caught my attention. It was a news segment, a charity gala in Santa Barbara, a foundation celebrating its 3rd anniversary, founded, the anchor said, in memory of a woman who died tragically in a bridge accident during a coastal storm. And then my photograph appeared on the screen. Not Anna's face, my face. A woman I recognized the way you recognize something from a dream, with a jolt that bypasses logic entirely. The name beneath the photo read, Megan Harlow. I couldn't breathe. The anchor continued. The foundation's founder, her devoted husband, Nathan Harlow, was being praised for turning personal tragedy into community service. Nathan was on the screen now, older, composed, standing beside a younger woman I didn't recognize, smiling with the ease of someone who had long since buried his grief, or buried his guilt. The coffee cup shook in my hand. I sat in that cafe for 2 hours after the segment ended. People moved around me. I didn't move. I was sorting through wreckage inside my own mind, pieces fitting together slowly, painfully, like bones reset after years of being broken wrong. I didn't have the full picture yet, but I had enough. I had my name, I had his face, and I had the memory of water rushing in, and the certainty, growing colder and clearer by the second, that I hadn't driven off that bridge. I had been pushed. That night, for the first time in 3 years, I didn't dream in fragments. I made plans. I didn't rush back. That was the first thing I had to discipline myself on. The impulse to move fast, to confront, to demand answers immediately. That impulse would get me nowhere. Worse, it would give Nathan time to prepare. So I took 3 weeks. I contacted a legal aid attorney in Fresno who helped me begin the process of reclaiming my identity. Medical records, the fisherman's statements, the hospital registration. It was slow and bureaucratic and maddening. But piece by piece, on paper, Megan Harlow came back to life. Then I drove to Santa Barbara alone. No calls, no warnings. I parked 2 streets from the house that used to be mine and watched. Nathan's routine was predictable. Morning coffee on the front steps. A drive to the office by 8. Lunch meetings downtown 3 times a week. The woman I'd seen on television, I learned her name was Rachel, came and went with the comfort of someone who had fully settled into a life she believed was hers. I didn't feel rage watching her. I felt something quieter and more dangerous. Clarity. I spent 2 weeks gathering what I could from public records, property transfers, business filings. The audit Nathan had initiated after my disappearance. Conveniently thorough, conveniently clearing him of any irregularities I might have flagged. And then I found it. A maintenance log from the city. The security camera on the bridge where I went over, the one that should have recorded everything, had been submitted for service repair 2 days before the storm. The work order had been authorized by a contractor, whose incorporation documents listed Nathan Harlow as a silent partner. It wasn't proof of attempted murder. Not yet. But it was the first thread. And I had learned, in 3 years of living as Anna with nothing but patience and silence, exactly how to pull a thread until everything unravels. Nathan thought the story was over. He had written the ending himself, but I was still here, and I hadn't even begun. There's a particular skill you develop when you've spent 3 years being nobody. You learn to watch without being watched. You learn to exist in the peripheral vision of a room without ever becoming the focal point. You learn that invisibility isn't about hiding. It's about becoming so unremarkable that people's eyes simply slide past you. I used every bit of that skill in Santa Barbara. I rented a room under Anna's name. The legal aid attorney had helped me establish a transitional ID while my full identity was being restored, in a neighborhood far enough from my old life that no one would recognize me, but close enough that I could move through the city without attracting attention. I cut my hair. I wore glasses I didn't need. I dressed plainly, and I watched. Nathan's company had expanded significantly in the 3 years since my death. 2 new developments along the coast, a third under construction inland. His name appeared regularly in the local business press, always accompanied by quotes about resilience, vision, and honoring the memory of his late wife. Every time I read those quotes, something tightened in my chest. Not grief, fury, compressed into something cold and functional. I also watched Rachel. She was younger than me by about 8 years, and she seemed genuinely unaware of the depth of what she'd stepped into. She volunteered for the foundation. She attended the ribbon-cutting ceremonies. She posted photographs with captions about legacy and love. I didn't hate her. That surprised me. But I understood that she was, in her own way, another person Nathan had positioned exactly where he needed her. I began making careful contact with former employees of his company, people who had left quietly in the years before my accident. I didn't identify myself. I simply didn't reveal who I was, and they talked anyway, voluntarily, with the relief of people who had been waiting for someone to finally ask. What they told me, carefully, and with evident discomfort, confirmed what the documents had suggested. Inflated contracts, pressure to sign off on reports they hadn't fully reviewed, a culture of deliberate opacity maintained by someone who understood exactly how much people wanted to believe in a good story. Nathan's entire empire was built on the assumption that no one would look too closely. He had forgotten one thing. I had spent 9 years inside that empire. I knew where the cracks were. And now, standing outside it with nothing left to lose and everything left to prove, I was the most dangerous person in his world. He just didn't know I existed yet. That was about to change. I want to be clear about something. I am not a vengeful person by nature. Before that night on the bridge, I was the kind of woman who avoided conflict, who looked for the charitable interpretation, who gave Nathan, the benefit of the doubt, long past the point where doubt had any business being extended. That woman didn't survive the fall. What came back from the water was someone more precise, more patient, and far less willing to protect a man who had tried to erase her. I worked methodically. The first thing I did was engage a private attorney in Los Angeles, far outside Nathan's professional network, and present her with everything I had: my medical records from the hospital and rehabilitation center, the fisherman's sworn statements, the bridge maintenance log, and the financial documents I had photographed before leaving the house that final night. I'd had the foresight 3 years earlier to send copies to a cloud account from a library computer. I had forgotten I'd done it. The account recovered my memory before my brain did. My attorney, a sharp, measured woman named Patricia Okafor, reviewed everything over 2 days. Then she looked at me across her desk and said quietly, "This is enough to reopen the case, but the way we present this will determine everything." She was right. I knew that. Nathan's greatest weapon had always been his credibility, his grief, his public image. If I simply walked into a police station, he would have time to construct a counter-narrative: traumatized woman, severe brain injury, confusion, manipulation. He would frame me as unstable before I could frame him as a criminal. So we chose a different approach. Patricia began submitting documents anonymously to the district attorney's financial crimes unit: copies of the falsified contracts, records of the shell company payments, the insurance payout timeline. Simultaneously, I made quiet contact with former employees of his company who had left under difficult circumstances. I didn't misrepresent myself. I simply didn't reveal who I was. I listened. I asked careful questions. And what they shared, voluntarily and without pressure, confirmed everything the documents had suggested: inflated contracts, deliberate opacity, A culture of fear maintained by a man who depended on people staying silent. They were ready to talk. They just needed someone to finally ask. I also found something I hadn't expected. Buried in a company filing from 2 months after my accident, there was a legal amendment to a property trust, signed by Nathan, witnessed by his business attorney, and dated 4 days after my official death declaration. The amendment transferred a significant coastal property into a holding structure that effectively shielded it from any future spousal claims. He had moved fast, which meant he had been prepared, which meant that night on the bridge was not an impulse. It was planned. I sat with that knowledge for a long time. I had suspected it, but suspecting something and seeing it documented in black ink are entirely different experiences. I gave myself one evening to feel the weight of it. Then I went back to work. Nathan found out I was alive on a Wednesday morning. Not from me, not from the authorities, from a photograph. A woman who had worked briefly at the rehabilitation center in Fresno, someone I had considered a passing acquaintance, nothing more, saw me at a coffee shop near the waterfront. She didn't approach me, but she recognized me, and she did what people do now without thinking. She posted about it. A vague, excited caption about seeing someone who looked exactly like that woman from the foundation, the one who died. It didn't name me. It didn't tag Nathan. But someone in his orbit saw it and made a call. By Thursday, Nathan knew. I know this because Patricia had quietly placed a legal contact inside the county clerk's office, someone monitoring any activity connected to Nathan's legal filings. Within 48 hours of that social media post, Nathan's attorney submitted a request for information regarding unresolved aspects of my death declaration. He was trying to find out how much I knew before I could find out how much he'd done. It accelerated our timeline. Patricia moved the anonymous document submissions to the DA's office forward by 2 weeks. The Financial Crimes Unit had already opened a preliminary inquiry based on the first materials. The new submissions, she told me, would likely trigger a formal investigation within days. But I made a decision Patricia didn't entirely agree with. I decided to let Nathan see me first. Not at a dramatic public event. Not yet. Something smaller, more destabilizing. I needed him off balance before the investigation became public knowledge, because a cornered Nathan with time to prepare was still dangerous. I arranged to be somewhere I knew he would be, a downtown restaurant where he took clients every Thursday. I sat at the bar, ordered coffee, opened a book. When he walked in, I didn't look up immediately. I waited, let him settle at his table, let him scan the room the way powerful men do, assessing, dismissing. And then I looked up and met his eyes directly. The color left his face in an instant. He looked away immediately, looked back. I was still there, still watching him, calm in a way I don't think he expected. Not the fragile woman he had pushed off a bridge, not a ghost, but something far more composed and far more purposeful. He left the restaurant within 4 minutes without ordering. That evening, Patricia received a call from his attorney requesting a private meeting. I told her to decline. There was nothing to negotiate. There was only what came next. The formal investigation became public on a Friday. The district attorney's office announced it without fanfare. A brief statement confirming that financial irregularities connected to Harlow Development Group were under active review, and that the circumstances surrounding the 2021 death declaration of Megan Harlow were being re-examined in light of new evidence. By Friday afternoon, it was the lead story on every local outlet. By Friday evening, it had gone national. Nathan gave a statement through his attorney. Measured, carefully worded. He expressed relief that his wife appeared to be alive, emphasized his hope for her full recovery, and noted that he welcomed any investigation that would bring clarity to a devastating chapter of his life. I read it and almost admired the construction of it. Almost. His strategy was clear. Cast himself as a man victimized by confusion and circumstance. Reframe the investigation as something that vindicated rather than implicated him. And, most critically, position me as fragile, traumatized, possibly misled by people with ulterior motives. He gave 2 television interviews that weekend. In both, he cried. I watched them from Patricia's office with my arms folded. Then I held my own press conference. I stood at a podium outside the courthouse on a Monday morning, Patricia beside me, and I spoke for 11 minutes. I didn't perform emotion. I didn't collapse or tremble. I spoke with the kind of steadiness that comes from 3 years of rebuilding yourself from nothing. I presented the timeline. I described what I had found in the documents. I described the night on the bridge. what I remembered, what I had pieced together, what the physical evidence supported. I described waking up in a hospital with no name and spending 3 years in Fresno as someone called Anna, while my husband collected my life insurance and moved on. I said, clearly and without hesitation, I did not drive off that bridge. I was pushed. And the evidence will show that this was not an accident, and that it was not the first crime my husband committed against me. The room was very quiet. Nathan's narrative began collapsing within hours. Nathan was arrested on a Tuesday, 6 weeks after my press conference. The charges were substantial: attempted murder, insurance fraud, falsification of business records, and obstruction of justice. The DA's office had built the case methodically, drawing on the financial records, the bridge maintenance documentation, the cell phone records showing calls between Nathan and the contractor, who had authorized the camera shutdown, calls placed the afternoon before the storm. He had planned it carefully. He simply hadn't planned for me to survive. His attorney entered a not guilty plea. There would be a trial. These things take time, and I understood that. I had learned, over 3 years of slow reconstruction, that patience is not passive. Patience is a form of endurance that keeps you functional when everything in you wants resolution now. Rachel reached out to me through Patricia's office 2 days after the arrest. She asked if I would speak with her. I said yes. We met at a quiet restaurant on a Tuesday morning. She was pale and visibly shaken, the woman I had watched from a distance for months, now sitting across from me with the expression of someone who had just discovered the floor beneath her was always hollow. She hadn't known. I believed her. Nathan had cultivated people who didn't ask questions, and Rachel was someone who had trusted the story she was given because it was a good story, and because he was very good at telling it. I didn't comfort her extensively, but I told her the truth, and I told her she had done nothing wrong, and I meant both things. Afterward, I drove to the bridge. I parked where I had parked 3 years ago, before everything changed. I got out and stood at the railing and looked at the water below. It was a clear morning. The ocean was calm in the way it never is during a storm, flat and silver and indifferent. I wasn't looking for closure. I don't believe in closure as a destination. I believe in continuation, in the daily, unglamorous work of moving forward through something that tried to end you. I stood there for a while. Then I got back in my car. In the months that followed, I formally dissolved the Megan Harlow Foundation. The remaining funds were redirected, with board approval, to 2 established organizations supporting survivors of domestic abuse and financial manipulation. I began consulting with Patricia's firm on cases involving financial fraud within intimate partnerships. It was quieter work than a press conference, less dramatic than a courtroom, but it felt like the most honest use of what I had survived. Nathan's trial date was set. I would testify. I was not afraid. The woman who had been afraid of her own husband in the dark of their bedroom. The woman who had driven into a storm still hoping she was wrong. She had gone into the water 3 years ago. What came back was different. Not harder, not colder, just unwilling to be silenced. And that, in the end, was everything. Thanks for watching this entire journey with me. Your support fuels every story we share. Leave a like, subscribe, and brace yourself for the next bombshell.